Wow. Thank you, Leah, and good morning, everyone. And I appreciate you all for waking up so early and joining the Zoom at 9 a.m. It's our first 9 a.m. Zoom. We usually do them at 10 a.m. So thank you all for being part of this experiment. But it looks like it's working well with so many people. We're over 60 folk here at 9 a.m. So I'm excited. Leah said, let's do it. And I just follow Leah's lead because she's really the smart person there. I'm surprised they haven't changed her title yet. She introduced herself as admin, but she's really the director and coordinator and manager all wrapped into one. So good morning. I see so many familiar faces who are on camera. I see Otis and Carol and Melanie, welcome. And Aaron and Diana and Minu and Martha and Teresa, Victoria and Jamila, welcome. Jocelyn, we're gonna jump right in. I'm gonna share my screen. We're gonna get down to some business here of emotional coaching. All right. So you should all see my screen. Can you give me a thumbs up if you see the screen? Yeah, all right, the share worked. Fantastic. Let me move this away. So welcome to our kind of little under a 2-hour session on emotion coaching. For those who may be familiar with emotion coaching, there are multiple ways to provide this kind of learning experience for parents, families, and adults. In its full capacity, this could be a 12-hour session, an 8-hour session, a 6-hour session, a 4-hour session, and we're moving with the 2-hour session. But we will make sure that you receive all the information needed. There are two different, hey, Dana, good morning, Dana Cox. Two versions of the slide decks. One is a slide deck where you can take notes for those who like to write on the side. And then one where each slide is really big for those who are like myself and you're vision impaired, so you don't like the little tiny squares. So both of those are provided to you as a resource, and they have everything that we're covering in the session on them today. All right. So I'm Shawn Bryant, those who are not familiar with me. My role is really largely professional development. I provide professional development largely for everybody, any adult who's involved in the lives of young children at any level. That's my succinct way of saying what I do, largely in one role with YesToECE, formerly the Teaching Excellence Center, and with Yale Ziegler Center for Child Development and Social Policy, where I train mental health consultants across the country on an assessment tool that we call the Child Scale. And I encourage you to keep up with me in lots of free stuff on social media, on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Pinterest. I'm still lightweight addicted to Pinterest, but I know lots of people don't go there anymore, but I still like Pinterest. All right, in this virtual learning process, we're going to raise awareness about this notion of emotion coaching for children and adults. We're going to learn some skills or some strategies related to emotion coaching, and we're going to have some processing, not as much practice because this is only 2 hours related to emotion coaching. So I encourage you all to grab something to write with so you can take notes and be reflective, to stay engaged in ways that work best for you and for your brain. And we know that neuroscience says that when we do this to take notes, which I love because it's a surefire way that I won't lose the notes if I'm typing, but neuroscience has confirmed that when we do this, it sends the message here and it actually solidifies what we're learning in a stronger way when we actually take notes with pencil or pen opposed to typing, even though I'm one of those people who love typing. I've created some community agreements for us just so that we can, work well together during this short period of time. But as always, I want your voices to come out. This is why I always say you can unmute yourself. You don't have to wait for permission. You don't have to raise your hand. We want your voices to come forward with your sharing, with your questions, and definitely during all the opportunities for reflection participation and feedback. We want to hear your voices. So I'm purposely not putting you all into any breakout rooms. I'm purposely not showing any videos with the intent that this morning in this short period of time, we're going to learn with and from each other and not just the content. So that's really that clarion call to be prepared to share your voice during our short period of time together. And I know some of you are at work or they're, Leah's at home with her 2 young daughters. So there are children in the background. So folk who feel like, oh, I can't unmute right now because the baby's screaming or the dog's barking, definitely use the chat box to stay engaged and to share with everyone on the call. Okay, let's jump in now. So a core theme for this notion of emotional coaching, I need you all to pretend that that circle you see there is a mirror and that you're looking into that mirror and you can see yourself reflected back at you. This is a core theme here. So this notion of, at the core of this, we're sending this resounding message to all adults who are involved in the lives of our youngest citizens in healthy and productive ways. We're sending this core message that they are enough. We start there. That is the starting place. We don't start from this place of deficit model or mindsets. We don't start from this place of you've been referred to county social services because of ineffective parenting. We start from this place of you are enough, first and foremost and always. That is the resounding message, is asset informed, which is different than strength-based. And I want you all to just hold this in mind as you consider this topic and this content that is largely research-based. So a quick overview. In our short period of time together, what we're going to cover is this notion of what Dr. John Gottman, the creator of emotion coaching, calls feelings about feelings. So in that feelings about our feelings, we're going to talk about what he calls meta emotions. We're going to talk about ways that adults feel about emotions and how they shape the way we perceive the feelings of others and how we promote that in young children in our lives. Then we're going to talk about responding to feelings expressed by children, showing children how emotions work and how to manage them as a goal. And then when we get to the 4 adult styles, these are the 4 styles that were identified by Dr. Gottman over 25 years ago. And this notion of dealing with emotions and what he calls the style or method that most of us have in handling emotions and how we model and demonstrate or teach those emotions and feelings to young children. And then we'll end with this notion of emotion coaching, where we're going to take a dive into the 5 steps of emotional coaching. And we're going to lay those out for us today. And how adults can help children understand emotions in healthy ways. That's a big takeaway here. And how adults who learn the steps of emotional coaching, that learning and implementing those steps directly benefits children. Here's the one that I actually like because I don't work in a self-contained classroom anymore. Emotional coaching works with adults who work with adults too. So if you're a supervisor like Melanie Trainer is, or like Otis Ward, who works with fathers around Alameda County, or Dana Cox, who largely works with adults throughout California, they're just some people on the call I'm familiar with. I know that they work with adults. So emotional coaching can work from adult to adult. It works with children, but let's not think if I don't work directly with children, this isn't meaningful. These steps have been found through research and evidence to work with adults, share space with other adults too. So let's start by defining this notion of emotion coaching. I'll give you 20 seconds to read Dr. Gottman's definition on the screen. That's right. So you should have read this notion of helping children to first understand the different emotions that we all experience as humans. And then this notion of them understanding why these emotions occur and how to handle them As we move into this notion of emotion coaching, we need to center ourselves not with just that core theme of adults knowing that they're enough, understanding the definition in those three components, but this other piece where we're going to talk about the brain in the next 4 slides and our social and stress systems. But we start with this notion of how do we all learn how to behave? Well, I'm going to answer that for you. Most of us learn how to behave from these two structures we see on the screen. The green side is, our homes, our families, those communal places that most of us, the vast majority of us, learn our values and how we should understand and see the world. And unfortunately, too many of us grow up trying to reteach ourselves because we realize, I didn't learn some of the best things from my home. Not everybody, but some people. And then lots of other people learn those structures for how to behave, specifically young children, from school, preschool, community structures, right? And in those two structures, the most significant people in our lives, or as some people like to say, their significant others, their abuelitas, their tias, their nans, their grandmothers, their big mamas, their uncles, their grandfathers, their moms, their dads, their big brothers, their cousins, all of those people in our intimate community, or our teachers, van driver, food service worker, social worker, those significant others. And we do this vacillating of trial and error, back and forth to learn how to behave. It requires repetition for all of us. And this notion of experiences and environments. Some of you may say, he's talking about epigenetics, experiences and environments that shape our brain. But young children in particular, and adults, because we always think it's not including adults. Young children and adults have a priority or a premium to feel safe, to experience feeling soothed, seen, and secure. And this precedes and overarches any type of learning, okay? That's really important for us to understand the tenets of emotional coaching. We all need access to secure relationships within these two structures and environments surrounding our relationships. This is where emotion coaching comes in. This is where emotion coaching comes in. And I like this chart because I created it to really juxtapose how, particularly at the beginning of this pandemic, but it's been around for forever, that we always try to impart the school structure onto families. And it's actually oppressive, that it's okay for those structures to be different. That we've been telling preschool parents for the last 24 months, you need routines, without acknowledging that their homes have rhythms and that rhythm dictates how, why, and when something like emotion coaching might show up, which will look and sound very different than it would in the context of your early learning setting, your preschool classroom, your transitional kindergarten classroom, your after school program, your family childcare. It's going to look different in all of those contexts. So as you go down it, see that there are similarities, but there are differences in how these structures teach children how to behave. So I wanted you all to understand that there's two systems. There's this social system and there's this stress system that really correlates well with emotion coaching, right? So it's basic here. Our physical and mental health and well-being is believed to be this ongoing delicate balance and dance between these two bodily systems we see on the screen. This means from birth, children are learning to recognize and regulate emotions, particularly ones to interact with others. This happens from birth for young children, that young children show up primed for this. When our social and stress systems work together to regulate emotions emotional responses rather, this informs our behavior. So when we're able to connect our experiences and our environments in children's lives, this is where emotion coaching works well within these systems, because we see that the social engagement system, it's about driving and pushing connection. That's the central core behind it. But our stress response system is about protection. It's about protection. Emotion coaching is designed to bridge these, and it works well within these systems. It's like hand in glove. I'm almost there. 2 more slides and we're going to get to our first activity. I need to set the ground though. Because the beauty and the challenge of presenting to First 5 Alameda is this isn't like they have trainings and say, this is a master class. You have to have all of these requirements to come, or this is the training and you have to be novice. You've had to been in this work under 3 years, or this is a training for these people at this level. The beauty and the challenge is all of you have varied experiences. There are always people on the call who would say, I am brand new to this work. I've been in my role under a year. Then there's those of you on the call who say, I've been doing this work for decades, and meeting those needs is always, the challenge that First 5 is attempting to meet and reach. So let's jump into the 3 types of stress responses that you see here on the slide, because this is really, again, connected to if we're able to emotion coach and if we're not aware of this. So this notion of positive stress, here's something you won't hear a lot of people talk about. Positive stress creates the foundation for resiliency. I'll say it again, because you may be working with those parents who say, I don't want my child to experience nothing that is going to make them feel bad or sad. We've heard this in the news now. Positive stress is necessary for the creation of resilience, not the absence, but the creation. Notice how that positive stress line and the tolerable stress line, those dark purple lines, they go up, but they begin to come down. Really important. Tolerable stress means something happens in my life, but there's some adults there who help me get through it. And the examples we see here on the screen is the 3-year-old breaks a bone, the love of a lost one. I'm going to come back to this positive stress one. But then toxic stress, we know that primarily that purple line goes up and it stays up. Here's what we found about toxic or severe stress. It happens with the absence of a positive adult. When at least one positive adult is present in the child's life, they move out of the toxic stress category and they end up in the tolerable or positive stress category. This is actually true. We notice that those toxic stress lines don't decrease. We would also say there's no emotion coaching happening here. But I don't want to focus on that. I want us to think richly about this positive stress. I've renamed positive stress useful stress. I'll say it again. I've renamed positive stress useful stress. It's useful because of how it primes us to become resilient. This positive stress, these are the adults who are providing children with emotion coaching. They're not saying, I'm going to prevent it all from happening. They're saying, when it happens, I'm there with you to co-regulate, to understand, to answer questions, to use emotion language, and to get myself and you through it. That's why it's useful, because it sets a firm foundation for young children, not to stand on a weak foundation, but one when we talk about resiliency, that is where it starts. So we talked about stress and we talked about the brain. Our brains have these needs, but our brains actually have a language depending on the part of the brain we're talking about. So I like to start at the bottom of the brain. The language of the brainstem is sensation. This means when we're stressed, when things are happening bad or we feel agitated, or the word that's going around now, thanks to Brother Rez Memenican, is when we're activated. There's some things we can do to actually connect ourselves to calm so that we can promote calm in young children. So folk who know me know that I typically keep lotion on my desk. And sometimes I'm on some difficult Zooms. And when that happens, I open up my lotion, I squeeze it on my hands, and I just start rubbing the lotion on my hands. That sensation calms me down. I know it about myself, so I do it. The other thing I know is that if I'm agitated, I do this. Because drinking that water activates my vagus nerve. It calms me down. The stress part of the brain's language, meaning what we need to provide it, is sensation. Things like blowing bubbles, all those things we do with young children that we don't realize we should be doing it early and often. Then our limbic system, this is that emotion coaching piece. The language of our limbic system is feelings. We've got to have a repertoire of feelings, language, and vocabulary. We're going to get into that a little bit later. So that when we have it, we can use it with and around and for children and ourselves. Then that helps our prefrontal cortex take control, because the prefrontal cortex is that's all about language and words. The prefrontal cortex wants to write things down. It wants to have deep conversations. It wants to do all of those things and talk about what it had experienced in those lower parts and the problem solving behind that. And today, we're not so much talking about the language of the brainstem, but the language of the limbic system and the cortex around emotion coaching is something I want us to understand. And for those who may come to some other trainings, if you come to the family engagement training, which is really based on this book that I co-authored, you can't see it, with some folk, I'm going to dive deep into strategies for each one of these around being responsive to trauma in family and children's lives. So if you're able to come to this slide, I'm going to unpack with lots of strategies for each level here on the screen. So our feelings about feelings. So this research that Dr. Gottman brought us really says that research in every culture says that emotions are felt in the same way. I need to say that again. Research shows that emotions in every culture is felt in the same way. Some of you are like, wait a minute, Shawn, don't let me unmute and tell you about yourself. I didn't finish yet. How those emotions are expressed differs from culture to culture and ethnic group to ethnic group. So we believe that there are 6 universal emotions that we all share as human beings. But how those emotions are expressed differs. This is why an understanding of the tenets of emotion coaching is so important. Everyone feels the same emotions. Some of us are more aware of them than others. Many of us value some emotions more than others. Some of us have a deeper and complex understanding of how feelings shape the way we model and teach with and for children. And some of us have a limited range of how to manage our own feelings and emotions. But there's hope for all of us. There's hope for all of us if we understand the tenets of emotion coaching. So let's move into our first activity now, where I'm going to hear from some of you. There we go. So I need you all to think back. Take a deep breath first. Take a deep breath. You're going to think back. You're not going to go into a breakout room. Hopefully 2 of you will unmute and you'll share when you'll bring your voice into the Zoom atmosphere. So I want you to think back to when you were a child, meaning 8 years of age or under, if you can remember. Now, most of you probably can remember aspects of being 4 and 5, 6, 7, and 8. There are probably a few on the call who say, I remember being a baby. No, you didn't, but I'm not going to challenge you right now. And there's a reason why you don't remember being a baby around where our emotions and memories live prior to age 3. But I want you to think of that time between, for the most part, being ages 4 to 8. I want you to think about, how did you learn about emotions? And then what was the impact of that learning on your future experiences? So let's just take 10 seconds of silence to think about how you learned about emotions. You might need to jot some things down for your memory, particularly if you're going to unmute and share, because I would love to bring those voices to the Zoom. I'll start by sharing the story. Then I would love to hear from maybe two people on the call to unmute. So my story about how I learned about emotions was pretty much at church. There was a large expression of emotions at church, a large array of emotions displayed on a weekly basis. I learned about emotions and was often told not to cry or express what others considered to be sad emotions. Primarily from my parents, from my father and my mother. And the impact of that was I internalized and believed what? Those things, that I wasn't supposed to cry. I wasn't supposed to display those sad emotions, particularly in public or around people. And when it internalizes, it starts to crystallize. And I know some more effective ways of understanding that now, but I also know because that was crystallized in my early childhood, it's something that I still have to grapple with around this outward expression of emotion, particularly grief, which is why oftentimes when I'm grieving folk is often delayed, not weeks and months, but years. And I understand it enough to know that that initial thinking, my parents weren't bad. You know, I love my parents. But this notion of how I learned about these emotions and how to express them, there was one container around how it was allowed at church in certain ways, but then in the home, and because I was male born, there were some things that were not valued around expressing of emotions that I carried into adulthood. I share that openly and honestly. So Jacqueline says, I learned about emotions from my mom and siblings and interactions. Rosalino said, through friends and relatives. Does anyone want to unmute and share your story around how you learned about emotions and the impact that it had on your future experiences?
Yes, Dr. Bryant, I'll share with you. I think one of the most times that what I can remember when I really experienced emotions, I guess I was I'm saying maybe 4 or it seemed younger.
Okay.
My mother and father, they were going through a divorce. And I remember my mother arguing over the phone, talking to my father, and she was crying. So that was like one of the most significant points of me remembering emotions.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Otis. Thank you. Appreciate it. One more person want to unmute and share? How did you learn about emotions? Go ahead, Luz.
Gracias. Yo cuando era pequeña, ahorita que recuerdo, era que mi papá a veces era muy estricto y no podíamos hablar con él. Entonces no podías expresar cuál era tu sentimiento, no le podía preguntar cosas que ahorita pues habla uno con sus hijos, como cuando crece, cuáles son los cambios en tu persona. No, eso no se habla. Entonces yo decía, bueno, no se tiene que hablar, y después entendí, ¿verdad? Que tal vez la cultura, así era la cultura de mi familia, y entender pues que no tenías que expresar tus cosas o tus sentimientos, no era válido, ¿verdad? Entonces, después pues yo he cambiado eso con mis hijos, siempre hablo con ellos, no tomé eso como algo que tenía que llevarlo con tiempo. Entonces rompí con eso. Entonces yo a mis hijos les hablo de todo. Es bueno sentirse triste. ¿Por qué te sientes triste? ¿Qué es lo que te hace sentir triste? ¿Verdad? Entonces es bueno llorar, ¿verdad? Porque como antes decían tus papás, los niños no lloran, ¿verdad? Los hombres no lloran. Entonces es difícil cuando no puedes expresar, ¿verdad? Entonces, pero hemos aprendido. Gracias.
Thank you so much for that, Luz. That was awesome. You shared so much there around the complexity of family and culture and emotions. and then the expression of those emotions. I think your story had all of that infused in there. Thank you so much. I appreciated hearing it, and you bringing your voice to the Zoom space. So when we think of this notion of meta emotions, so we heard from Otis and we heard from Luz and myself around how we learned about emotions growing up, and the impact that it had on us as adults and what we thought was those first and early experiences. So now I want us to think about, we heard those stories, some questions related to these kind of early or meta emotions that we all have. This first question is, how do you experience anger or sadness? How do you experience anger or sadness? This is a reflective question. For those who want to share, I encourage you to put your answer, your response in the chat box. How do you experience anger or sadness? We're going to use the chat box to share for those who want to and feel compelled to share broadly. How do you experience anger or sadness? I'll share out loud before we go to the next one. I know I see a difference in how I experience anger or sadness. If I'm sad, I usually want no one to know. I'm trying to get home, to be alone. I don't want anyone to see that area of myself. But ironically, if I'm angry and upset, I want the world to know. And I realize why. I want the world to know because I want the world to change around what made me angry. It's really interesting. But if I'm sad, particularly sometimes about that anger, if the anger changes and switches to sadness, I don't want that outward sadness to be viewed by others. And I learned this somewhere. Let's see. Otis said sadness, withdrawing. Treza said being silent. Jamila says, I cry when I feel sad. Aaron said, for anger, a physical tenseness. And Helika said, crying makes me feel better, like getting my emotions out. They do say, those natural tears can help us feel better. Melanie says, my heart races and I feel constricted in my body. Woo, that sounds serious. Miriam says, getting into defense mode. Jocelyn says, I cry when I'm angry and I shut down when I'm sad. Lots of crying, Jamila said. Carol says, I cry and I hide. Gal says, I cuss and I cry. I'm laughing because I do that sometimes too. Yadira says, I get quiet if I'm sad or angry. Diana says, anger, I often let the person know what offended me or what I found insensitive and how they spoke to me or my children. All right. Audrey says, when I'm sad, others can tell from my facial expressions. Bobby says, I get quiet and shut down. Dana says, my body feels tense. And if I'm listening to my body, I try to move the energy. Ooh, I like this. I walk, I yell, I cry, and then figure out the unmet human need that is occurring. So there's a lot of processing going there. All right. And she answered some of the next question for us. How do you express this emotion? So some of us answered that in the first one when we said, how do we experience anger or sadness? How do we express it? Because we all don't express it the same way. I said, when I'm angry, my expression is I want the world to know. But when I'm sad, that expression is really internalized. Others, when they're sad, they what? They said, I'm going to let others know I'm sad. I'm going to cry in front of people, and I'm going to externalize it and not internalize it. This expression, we've got to pay attention to because we're modeling it for children. We're modeling it for adults who potentially are learning from us without us even being aware of it. We just assume because I'm working with another adult that they understand feelings and emotions. The truth is, many of us don't. Many of us don't. And this third piece here is, how do you feel about this? So how do I feel about this experience of anger in the expression of it? How do I feel about this sadness and this expression of it is the big takeaway. Because we're teaching about emotions every single day during interactions from the time we wake up until the time we go to sleep. We're modeling it without even being aware of it because it becomes our habit. Sometimes we have the ability to consciously teach it. And then we're definitely modeling and teaching the ways we respond to those feelings. I remember having a colleague who said, she said when in her family, when her father was upset, he would always go into the bathroom and close the door and everyone in the house would get quiet. And I thought that was so odd. But that's how he expressed his anger. And they all knew if he went into the bathroom, they could hear him in the bathroom, but they all just waited patiently for him to come out the bathroom. That expression of it and how he was telling them and modeling for them and teaching them implicitly how to respond to natural and normal emotions. So Luz and Dana both put in their response what I call, a lot of people, you hear lots of folks saying, sit with the emotion, sit with the emotion. I tell people, that may not be the best thing for you. When you have that emotion, you want to do something with it. You want to walk with it. You want to stand with it. You want to rock with it. Do something with it. Lou said, I clean the house. Dana said, I go for a walk. You have to do something with it. It is the helpful part. It is the strategy that this notion of sitting with it continues to do damage to us. That is not the best strategy. And that's what we hear lots of people saying, sit with the emotion. We've been saying that for decades. And then what we've seen is no change in any of us. So Gottman and his team define this notion of meta emotions as the way we feel about feelings and emotions. That's essentially what this meta emotions mean, the way we feel about feelings and emotions. This process of understanding that, it begins with us exploring our emotions and feelings, meaning introspection, us going inside, looking at how do you handle your emotions and how does that impact your behavior? And I can keep you all here for the rest of the week by responding to how do I handle emotions 20 years ago compared to how do I handle emotions today? How did it impact my behavior 20 years ago compared to how does it impact my behavior today? There's been a huge change personally. Yeah. And thinking about how we feel about certain emotions, a big change there for me. You had something you wanted to share, Otis?
Oh, sorry, I was unmuted as well. No, it was just funny because I just had a conversation with one of my colleagues on Friday. We were just talking and I was telling him, now that I'm older, the things that used to move me, through wisdom and knowledge, they don't move me the same. He was like, that same person is there, that I grew up with in my younger years. And I'm like, yeah, that person is there, but I've learned how to control certain emotions and don't allow myself to be that shooting gun anymore. And he's saying it wasn't true, but I think he was just pulling my leg because
I'm gonna say I think I'm gonna be the mediator here and then move forward. I see Melanie raised her hand. So that initial shooting gun, when we've done something repeatedly, we've mapped our brain. But what you said is I've actually rewired my brain. This is why neuroscience is so important, that you're saying when this thing happens, what I used to do was these things. Now, when those same things continue to happen, I've not just had new strategies, but I've remapped my brain. I've created a new pathway. You've ever gone through the park and there's the cement part where we're supposed to walk. And then there's always where human beings have created this shortcut, this footpath. And you think, oh, if I took the cement path, it's the long way around. But some humans started saying, I'm just going to cut right after this tree and we're going to get there. And then we see this whole other path. That's exactly what our brains do. That initial response was that shortcut. What you did was said, this shortcut isn't helpful anymore. Here's what he was trying to say, that shortcut in your brain, it never goes away. Your brain is not going to prune that shortcut. It's still there. And if the right thing happens that triggers you to when you were 20, that shooting gun might surface because it's still there. And what rests on top of that is the new pathway, the new wiring that you created, which is what we want most of us to do. Now, under severe stress, that old one may percolate up. It's still there, but it's kind of grayed out because you're using a new pathway to lead you. I believe that's what they were trying to say, but in a different way. Melanie, thank you, Otis.
So I was just going to say is, we were talking about the aging process. Like my daughter is the age I was now when she was born, and I hear her inner critic and how I feel like as I've aged in wisdom, that inner critic is a little bit kinder and our priorities shift about what's so important and who I have in my life and how people treat me, and having less tolerance for that, because the acceptance, the ability to be, I have accepted myself better as I've matured. And so other people's feelings aren't nearly as impactful as they are as when I was, in my 20s. So just definitely resonating that as I've gotten older, that having less F's to give,
Right. Totally. Did you just let us into that other part, Melanie, that Dr. Gottman discovered in his research, that the ways adults feel about our feelings has a direct correlation to, guess what? The way the children around us feel about their emotions. So we're not blaming us, but oftentimes is what we think we're doing that's on the positive end is sending a different message to our child or children around us that we're parenting, that are part of our family, or ones that we teach. Because children learn about emotions from adults. And then some adults are learning about emotions from you too. So this, what you just shared is so profound, Melanie, because he's really getting at that oftentimes it happens in a way that we're not even aware of, that it's happening for us and our children simultaneously in that kind of ongoing cyclical learning process. So just some reflective questions as we move forward, just a few of them. This first one says, do you know how you are feeling throughout the day? Often what we find is adults often are more aware of some emotions than others. The ones we like, we lean towards, depending on what we feel about those certain emotions. So there are times of the day when you can identify the emotion, then there are times of the day when you probably can't. And that's probably the challenging times where you felt ambiguous, or you have what we call double dip feelings. Young children have them all the time. It's a great children's book on double dip feelings that I have in my children's library, where let's say I'm walking and I trip and fall, right? I trip and fall. And then Christine, it startles her. So she gets startled, but she giggles. What we often do is say, Christine, that's not funny. Shawn could have hurt himself, because we don't understand that Christine had two feelings. The first feeling was she got startled that I was going to fall and hurt myself. The second one was nervous laughter. Adults have that also. And oftentimes when we have more than one simultaneously, it becomes hard for us to identify what the real feeling was, because it's more than one. All right. Do you know how you've learned those emotions? Adult attitudes and emotions usually reflect the attitudes we experienced when we were young. I told a little bit of my story. Adults who are in touch with their feelings, here's this current research. Those of us who are in touch with our feelings and well-being report better overall health. Imagine that. Who knew that? This notion of, can you name your own feelings? Some of us have a large emotional vocabulary, while others of us have a small emotional list. Where you are across that continuum throughout the day, based on the context, the circumstance, the situation, or the person, you need to be able to name that piece to get you out of that limbic system. Naming the emotion the feeling is necessary to get us out of the limbic system. Many of us are stuck in that cyclical process, so we can't do any good for young children. And you all heard me say this before, that when we're stuck in the limbic system, what we end up saying is, oh, Carol's just in her feelings. Oh, Marion's just in her feelings. What we're really saying is she keeps telling her story, but she won't say, and I felt sad. I was frustrated. I was upset. I was angry. So we tell the narrative and then we leave out the feeling and emotion. And our limbic system says it's important for you to name that in addition to telling the story, because that helps me take a step up when you name the feeling, because the language of that part of the brain says, I need for you to name this experience. So crucial, so crucial. So these next two are really for us. How do you recognize children's emotions? Adults who are more aware of children's emotions pay attention to more than just what the child is saying or doing. We're observing what I call the three modes of communication: verbal, what they're saying; nonverbal, what their body is saying; and paraverbal. The example of paraverbal is my grandmother would say, Shawn, it's not what you said, it's how you said it to your little brother that upset him. My tone of voice, my cadence, my speech rate, all of this we have to pay attention to for young children, specifically young children who aren't very verbal. We have to do this early and often because that pushes us to the what? Positive stress side. If we ignore them, we push it back to the severe stress side. So this fifth part, reflective question that I want you to keep considering is, how do you know that your perceptions are accurate when you observe young children? How do you know that your perceptions are accurate? The only way to do it is to keep practicing, to keep observing through repetition. And then here's the big one. Watch how children respond. Watch how children respond. Guess what that means for most adults? It means we're not in control. We're not telling them how to think, how to act, how to feel. We have to wait and see. And most of us dislike that. We don't want to wait and see. We want to know what the feeling is right now, give you a strategy for it, and move forward. Then we're not the best emotion coach. So let's move into our next activity. Our next activity. If I can get the slide to move, I don't know what's going on with this slide today. So we see this little boy demonstrating what we call the 6 universal emotions that cross cultures, knowing that how these emotions are expressed differs from what? Culture to culture. How they're expressed differs from culture to culture. So I just want someone to look at photo number 1, and I want you to unmute and just say, Shawn, I think the emotion he's expressing, name the emotion. I want you to just name the emotion. Name the emotion. Anybody? When you look at picture number 1, what emotion do you see demonstrated?
Happy. This is Gloria.
Gloria said happy. Thank you, Gloria.
Goofy.
All right. When we see emotion number 2, what do you see demonstrated here under picture number 2? Not emotion.
Sad.
Sad.
Okay, I hear sad. Did I hear a second one? Someone said sad and someone said something else?
Concerned.
I see confused.
I see sullen.
Worried.
Bored.
Okay, thank you all. Let's look at number 3. When we get to number 3, what do we see?
Angry.
Mad.
Angry. Someone said what?
Mad.
Mad. Okay, anyone else?
Frustrating.
Frustrated. Okay. Number 4.
Scared.
Scared.
Startled.
Yikes.
Sorprendido.
Apprehensive.
Apprehensive. Okay, thank you, Mark. Number 5.
Emocionado.
Surprised.
Surprise.
Dana, you said proud and disappointed for which one?
1 and 2.
Okay, I missed those. I'm sorry.
No worries.
For number 5, just surprised.
Excited.
Excited. Number 6.
Hated.
You said hated?
Yes.
Disappointed.
Disgusted.
Just
I was going to say goofy.
All right. Thank you all. So we said number 1 was happy. Number 2 was sad, confused, worried. Number 3, angry, mad, frustrated. Number 4, scared, surprised, apprehensive. Number 5, surprised, excited. Number 6, disappointed, disgusted, and goofy. So let's see what, the researchers said about how we labeled these.
Mm-hmm.
So you all were right. That first one is happy. Number 2 was sad. Number 3 was angry. Number 4 was fear. Number 6 was surprise. And number 5 was surprised. And number 6 was disgust. Wow. Awesome. You all did a really good job of labeling the way these 6 basic core emotions showed up on this little boy. Awesome. I'm gonna give y'all a hand, because I don't think I would have ever gotten fear correct, or disgust. I don't think I would have ever figured that out from those pictures. Because remember, we all experience the 6 basic emotions on the screen, but how they're expressed depends on how our parents and our caregivers and our teachers responded to these emotions. All right. So this emotional language piece, this is strategy. We just saw the ones in the green. Those are hardwired for all of us. Researchers believe they're hardwired for survival based on adaptation of our behaviors, which is why it was so easy, right, for most of us to kind of name those quickly and correctly, because we're hardwired for them. But when we look to the left and the right, to the blue and the purple, these are those other emotions. We call them level 2 and level 3 and level 4 that must be taught. They must be taught. But for us to teach them and model them, guess what? We have to have an understanding of them. But guess what the reality is? Most adults are hardwired in the middle, and that's the extent for most of us. This feeling and knowledge of humility and patience and optimism and gratitude and forgiveness and sympathy and shame and compassion, these are things that must be taught. So if we're not teaching them, we need to take a step back and figure out how to get past this sad, happy, angry, disgust, surprise, and fear as the 6 basic emotions that all human beings experience, to this other expression of the long, long list of emotions that you may experience and that children experience, but we never name for them. This is a huge strategy that we all need to embody. All right, I'm gonna speed up a little bit here. So there are some takeaway messages from that section. We need to recognize our emotions. We've got to learn our emotions and the emotions of young children, that is. Learning to become an emotion detective when it comes to children's feelings. I just felt myself wanting to speed up, and then I realized we were doing simultaneous Spanish translation, so I made myself slow down. This may look easy, but it's oftentimes difficult to look for cues around recognizing the emotions of children. But when we're in tune with our own emotions, we're off to a good start to teaching and modeling it for young children. Then we've got to decide if we're going to value emotions. Luz told an awesome narrative around where her family was on that valuing continuum of emotions. Depending on your family and where you grew up, emotions could have been ignored or simply not allowed to be expressed. This does not mean that young children need to learn the same things. That's not what we're talking about around values. But we are talking about us as adults changing the patterns, in that this valuing of emotions, we bring it into this level of awareness to say, oh, these are some emotions that I actually don't value or hold in high esteem, because then when a child demonstrates it, we probably won't become the most effective emotion coach. And then this notion of understanding our emotions. It's easier to say it than it is to value it. That normal and natural emotions, we all feel them across the continuum. They help us to experience what? The ups and downs of life. They help us understand how others are feeling. It becomes a doorway into empathy. When we understand emotions, we make it safe for children to feel. I have to say that again. When we understand emotions, we make it safe for children to feel. This is why Dr. Mark Brackett at Yale has written a book, Permission to Feel, and he's made $1 million, because there's something in society that says you can't feel and you don't have permission to feel. This is the first step in learning how to handle our emotions, by understanding emotions and where we are on that continuum. So we're going to move into the next part. I title this, How Do You Adult? It's really the 4 styles, but I just like this term, how do you adult? So I want you to, as we move into this notion of these 4 styles, I want you to identify, when you're one of these 4 styles, because many of us find that we're not one. Aspects of all 4 show up in our lives. So we start with the first one here. We call this emotion dismissing. When children are surrounded by adults who are emotion dismissing, they learn that negative emotions can't be trusted. I'll say that again. They learn that negative emotions can't be trusted. It's only good to feel happy. We better get over certain emotions real quick, rather than feel them and be understood. Children quickly learn to hide emotions. They learn that some feelings won't get noticed until they blow up. They definitely don't learn how to cool down from emotion dismissing adults. Here's the example I like to use. There are 2 parents in the house. One parent is leaving to go on the trip. Says goodbye to the child and goodbye to the other parent. The remaining parent, who's emotion dismissing, the child says, oh, I miss the other parent. I miss them. There's no engagement around, yeah, I miss them too. I wonder, maybe we can draw them a picture. We can call them on the phone later. They're on the plane now. The parent instead says, let's bake some cookies. The parent really is saying, I don't want them to feel anything related to missing the other parent. They're dismissing the emotions. This happens often. Some of us see it as, I'm just redirecting. Redirecting has a place, but when we redirect and never engage in what a child is feeling, we're dismissing it. Not effective. The next one is emotion disapproving. These adults are uncomfortable with any display of emotion. Children quickly learn that there are good and bad feelings, and that bad feelings are viewed as something is wrong with me as the 5-year-old. My feelings have to get switched on and off like a light switch. The example I often use is to the emotion disapproving adult. The child can't sleep. They're told multiple times to go back to sleep. Then the child says, I think there's a monster. Then the adult says, there are no monsters. There's nothing to fear. This is the 3rd time I'm telling you, just go back to sleep. Emotion disapproving sounds like this. And this happens at home and it happens in preschool classrooms. I see it all the time as a coach. Emotion disapproving. This next one, which I think is, we need more like a public service campaign about it, because we have 40 years of research on laissez-faire parents and how damaging it is to children. These parents, the tricky part is they actually learn and value that all feelings are worthy, and they want their children to be open about their feelings. And here's the piece, all feelings and responses are accepted. Children learn from these parents that it's okay to act out and misbehave. Almost anything goes when it comes to behavior. These children don't learn how to calm down and connect the calm when they're excited or angry. And without the adult guidance, they don't learn how to handle emotions because there's no container. They don't learn how to act appropriately, and they end up in lots of trouble with friends. 40 years of this research has told us that these children who are now 40 to 45, most of them have had a hard time keeping employment past 12 months consecutively. Most of them, Carol's shaking her head, yeah, have been in and out of their parents' homes. Laissez-faire parenting is dangerous because it doesn't set children and adolescents up to be independent. It sets them up to be reliant. And the tricky part is because the adult is fine with the emotions, but their other behavior says, do it alone and don't notice others. So these children learn quickly to become what? Egocentric. Fundamentally, the researchers found that laissez-faire adults miss the crucial step in helping children understand their emotions and working out the solution. We value all emotions, but you don't help me understand why I'm angry or why I'm sad or why I'm excited or why I'm proud, which is the missing step and element to laissez-faire parenting and adult approaches. This final one, emotion coaching, we're going to explore in our final 6 slides, emotion coaching. So in short, dismissing adults tell children, just get over it. Let's go do something else. Disapproving adults, you shouldn't feel that way. There's no reason for you to feel sad. You have everything. You have more than other children. Have some of you heard this? I heard it growing up. Shawn, you have no reason to be upset. Look at that room. You have everything you want up in that room. No, I don't. Laissez-faire adults basically say anything goes. I won't name them right now, but I have a few friends who have young children, and this is their parenting approach. This is their parenting approach. And those of us who can get to that space of learning how to emotion coach, which we're going to find out the 5 steps, we learn how to empathize and guide children. We learn how to empathize and guide children. So the research says that most adults use all 4 of these styles at different times. There's no perfect parenting, there's no perfect teaching, there's no perfect adult. Then Dr. Gottman's research found that successful emotion coaches only use emotion coaching, I was about to say emoji, emotion coaching 30% of the time. I'll say it again. Successful emotion coaches only use emotion coaching 30% of the time. Because most of the time we handle the child's emotions differently. Now let's unpack that for a moment in these next 2 slides, and then we're going to pause the process for a moment. So some of you remember Ed Tronick's work on the still face experiment. You can Google it. There's one where they just did it with fathers. They originally did it with mothers, where they kind of look at the child and then they turn away and they're not in sync. So what this research found is actually, it fits well with emotion coaching. They found that emotion coaching is being in sync. And the Ed Tronick's research said that adults, parents, teachers, we're only in sync with children, even your children, if you're a parent, 20 to 30% of the time, you're only perfectly aligned with them. 20 to 30% of the time. And here you thought you were a perfect parent. Victoria had to sit up on that one. 20 to 30% of the time, we're only in sync. So you may be saying, Shawn, that ain't a lot. Our question for reflection, and I want us to share some of this in the chat. When are you most in sync with the child or children? Depending on your role as a parent, if you work with children, if you work with adults who work with children, when are you most in sync with the child or children? Let's take 2 minutes and put it in the chat box. Leah says, when I'm calm and not in a hurry, and she has 2 spunky daughters. When I'm calm and not in a hurry, I'm in sync. Thank you, Leah. Gloria says, when the child is calm. So Gloria says, when they're calm, I can get in sync. Thank you for that, Gloria. When are you most in sync with the child or children? Aaron says, most in sync when I'm getting my needs met and I can be focused on others. Wow. Maria says, one-on-ones are easier. Carol says, when I'm in a good mood. Julie says, when my child needs me most. Wow. So Julie says, I meet that emotional need and get down to their level. Oda says, when the child isn't agitated. Dana says, I am most in sync when I'm feeling regulated, calm, and my basic needs are met. Okay. Thank you all. So now let's look at the rest of the time. That means that 70 to 80% of the time, no, the researcher says we're not in sync. I don't like that word because then when they explain it, it gets explained in this different way. 70 to 80%, we are working. Here's the big word. We are working, and I didn't put it on the screen intentionally because I want you to write it down. 70 to 80% effective parents, effective teachers, effective caregivers, effective adults are working to get back in sync. So if you think about it, that child that made you take a deep breath and you always said, I got to do things differently with Shawn. When you decided to do things differently, you were always working to get back in sync with me. Ineffective parents say, they become laissez-faire. Well, he's just not doing it, so that's just on him. We do nothing to get back in sync with children. Getting back in sync is doing the work of emotion coaching. Getting back in sync is doing the work of emotion coaching. So our question for reflection is, when are you out of sync with the child or children? When are you out of sync with the child or children? Let's use the chat. Let's hear from more people this time. When are you out of sync with the child or children? Aaron said, when I'm distracted, I'm out of sync. I know that's right, Aaron. Gloria says, when I'm stressed, when I'm finding it difficult to understand their needs, when I need to multitask. You can do that, Diana? I don't know how to multitask. I just prioritize. Courtney says, when I'm fighting with my partner, okay? Julie says, when I'm distracted or stressed. Jocelyn says, when I'm in a hurry or juggling too much. Seems like you're a Delta near Jacqueline. Leah says, when I'm tired, hungry, or stretched thin. Uh-oh, it started moving quick. When I'm too sad. Rosa says, when I'm stressed or hungry. Bobby says, when you're not communicating with them. Audrey says, as a single parent, I feel out of sync often, but during weekdays, work days mostly. Being out of sync is not a crime. You're going to work to get back in sync. That's the key. Leora says, when I feel I'm reflecting correctly and it's not working, we keep going back. Yes, that's what we do. Linda says, too many tasks and working from home. Maria says, not making time to catch up on their day. Angela says, when I'm frustrated. See, we know when we're out of sync. So the strategy here is, remember, being out of sync is about getting back in sync and doing the work. You all have just identified times when you know you're out of sync with children or a child or your partner or another adult. So when we have that awareness, then it demands that we do something different. That means that if I'm frustrated, I may have to say, Dana, I can't have the conversation right now. I'm going to need 20 more minutes. I'm going to have to do something so that when I have the conversation, I can be fully present and then Dana doesn't experience my frustration. And too often we engage knowing that we're already frustrated instead of asking for the space. There are two separate strategies that we've got to learn how to integrate into who we are. Unfortunately, most of us were not taught this and it wasn't modeled for us, which is why even though I'm frustrated, even though I'm hungry, even though I tried to reflect and I still feel out of sync, I engage with you. And then when I engage with you, guess what happens? I further what? Get out of sync with you because I haven't done what? Connected to calm myself. So this notion of this fourth style that Dr. Gottman outlines, this fourth style of emotion coaching, what we see here on the screen is what the research says about children who benefit from emotion coaching, that they get from adults, that their feelings can be trusted and they're important, and that they're not alone in my feelings. And I can constantly come back to Letitia as a trusted adult with my feelings. And that Aaron's going to give me time to teach. Well, Aaron's going to take time to teach me as the child to solve my problems. And we're going to talk about that problem solving in a few more slides. And Angelica is going to show me how to calm myself down, not once, but through repeated experiences. Because then my own feelings and the feelings of others get valued. And of course, all of those trusted adults that I just named, they help me understand that my different feelings are okay, that my different feelings are okay. And they help me to distinguish not all behaviors are okay, that my different feelings are okay, but not all behaviors are okay. They're not collapsing them into one. Too often, we collapse those last two into one experience. We don't understand them as different and distinct. So then what happens? We model and teach the children that they're the same. So then we have children thinking that their feeling isn't okay, so that they're not okay, and the behavior is not okay. Those are three separate and distinct things. And that a key component to emotion coaching is that we're really helping children know that all feelings are okay, but some of the behaviors based on their feeling are not okay. And this is why the problem solving becomes important. I can't restate that enough. Different behaviors are okay. Not all behaviors are okay. Does that make sense? Dana, does that make sense? Why does that make sense, Dana?
Because you're really validating the child as a human being, but also setting, as you talked about earlier, those guidance and boundaries for ways that emotion can be expressed. And I was also thinking about earlier about also the context and how I sit there and looked at my thing. I said, yell. I have hopefully learned that I might have to go out in the field somewhere and yell, but that's not going. I've learned that that's not going to be an effective way to deal with that emotion. But maybe walking. So am I along the right way?
Yeah, the context is important.
Yeah.
Like this is that cultural piece that it might change around how we recognize and express feelings based on the context of who we are or where we are or who we're with. All of that is part of it. Thank you, Dana. So the takeaway messages about that section, this notion of feelings, we need to really help children understand that feelings are not just good or bad, they're normal and natural. In that this notion that children can't control how they feel, so we have to help them as adults figure out what to do with their emotions. Yeah. Then this notion of when a child is upset, because this is largely about behavior, this notion of emotion coaching. We're not going to try to make them happy right away. I've been guilty of that. Actually, I did it yesterday with my 4-year-old cousin. Her dad had to go to work and they have one car. So her mother, who's my first cousin, called me on Sunday and said, can you drive us to the hospital? Her daughter had to get what's that thing when they put you in a machine, they had to look at her little heart. So we took her 2 younger children to her grandmother's house and I drove them to the hospital. And then when her siblings got out the car, she started crying. And I literally wanted to make her feel happy right away. So I ran to my aunt's house and got her what? A lollipop and gave it to her and she stopped crying. And I knew that was wrong. I knew that wasn't helpful. I just didn't want her to cry the whole ride to the hospital. I had to meet my immediate need. Now, do I do that all the time? No, that wasn't effective. We've got to let them know it's okay to feel whatever they're feeling. I should have let her cry and let her know that it was okay to cry. When I'm on my best self, I'm doing that. But remember, we said we're always not that emotion coach. I should have let her know that I was there to help. I wanted her to stop crying so that when we were in that car for 30 minutes driving to the other part of the city, she wasn't going to sit in the backseat crying. That's what I wanted as the adult. I'm fully aware of it and I share it in full transparency with this judging audience. You all can judge me later. And this notion of being an emotion coach, adults can learn to value emotional times with children. I'll say it again. Adults can learn to value emotional times with children. But to do that, we've got to learn what? How to express emotions and to value the expression of emotions. That when children are confused about emotions, they can come to us as an anchor to move away from that confusion. And we use, and that's capital USE, this as an opportunity to bring the child closer. Imagine that when you're upset, instead of me trying to correct your behavior, I use it as an opportunity for us to what? Get closer emotionally. I don't push you away or just discipline the behavior. I'm using it as this opportunity to teach, model, and practice. Now, we're not going to unpin those pieces because they're going to be different based on your program, based on what the families value, based on what your values are. But this teaching, modeling, and practice are core components of emotion coaching. All right, Leah, we're about to finish strong. So Dr. Gottman said emotion coaching is helping children to understand the different emotions they experience, that these emotions occur, and that they can handle these emotions. Those three big pieces. So Carol, I see your question. That's a provocative question. Carol always has provocative questions. She says, how to tell your partner and kids the bottom line of our feelings and ask them to don't cross over. Carol, I don't want to assume some pieces here because I could plug in some gaps. I might need you to explain that one some more. And then Melanie says, so think about how you're going to explain it, Carol, if you want to. But I feel like I can't respond to that one because I feel like I'm missing some context. Melanie says, our culture promotes aversion to discomfort. So people don't want to deal with what makes them uncomfortable. So, that's my favorite word right now, discomfort, Melanie. So here's my response to this level of I don't want to deal with discomfort and folk that are conflict averse. I give it a thumbs up when someone says, I feel uncomfortable. I say, yes, that means you're still human, that humanity is taking hold inside of you, which is why you're having that internal response. That is a good thing. That's something I give a thumbs up to compared to people who say, I didn't feel anything. They make me scared. So this notion that people say, I'm feeling discomfort, it's actually an opportunity. Remember, we're talking about opportunities here to talk about it, to talk about the discomfort, not one time, but ongoing and continuously, to unpack the discomfort if it's part of your home's culture, if it's part of your ethnicity or your community's culture. We've got to start having a conversation around what pieces make us uncomfortable and why, because that's the only way to turn the discomfort into what? Comfort. If we stay there, then we're saying injustices, difficulties, differences are all okay. And I can guarantee you that's not what most people will say they agree to. But if we say, I can't deal with the discomfort, and largely the people around me who are like me can't deal with the discomfort, the entry point I find is discussing the discomfort and bringing it past awareness into this notion of, wow, I'm not the only one. Now, what do we do about it? I think it's a really good thing if someone can name the discomfort. I don't think it should, historically, when people name discomfort, it's often created silence, which means we don't talk about it and then we move on or change the topic. We do what parents do when they're ineffective. Like I did, let me just give her the lollipop so that she can stop crying, which isn't effective. And we've for too long allowed this notion of, I'm uncomfortable with this, to silence whatever we're talking about, even if it's about emotions and an array of emotions or expressing them. I just had this conversation last week with some folk around this notion of being stoic. And I personally have a great frustration with folk who value being stoic. There's like no display of emotion or feeling as the way to be as a standard. And I'm like, huh? How is that okay? But then it gets pushed in our society. It gets pushed in corporations and in business that no matter what was really happening, we must put on face. I'm not so sure that's the healthiest thing for us as a society in our work lives or our professional lives. I'm just not so sure of it. Aaron says, busy life doesn't allow time for emotions, but interesting, Aaron, because even if we have a busy life, guess what? We're experiencing emotions in that busy life. We probably just aren't in tune to them. I love that. We need to find ways to make time for children and ourselves to experience emotions and work through them. The number one way is to slow down and notice them. To slow down and notice them. Driving in the car, oh, that person almost cut me off. That made me nervous. I can say that to my children, but we're okay. Look, we're going to get to grandma's house. All right. These are the ways that, because young children experience that too. They experience what happened in the front seat with you. They're experiencing it in the backseat through you. So that if we name it, these are those entry points to how we actually emotion coach. Carol, are you ready or you want to skip?
Oh yeah, I think you experienced some already. My understanding. That's good. That's okay. Yeah.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thanks, Carol.
Thank you for valuing my emotion.
So this notion of what is empathy? What is empathy? There's no right or wrong answer here. We're learning. I want a few people to put it in the chat. If I said, what is empathy? And I need you to define it succinctly in one sentence. Put your definition of empathy without Googling it. Don't ask Siri. Don't ask Alexa. Use your definition and put it. When I talk to my nephews, I have to say, don't ask Siri and don't ask Alexa. I want you all to answer this question. I literally have to talk to them that way, because if I say, what's the answer to this? 3 of them will pull their iPhones out and say, hey, Siri. I was like, what is happening in front of me? I couldn't look at my phone, just beeped. I said, hey, Siri, and it beeped. I don't want you to do that.
Shawn, how can I help?
I'm not going to say it anymore because my phone responded. Ooh, Marion says validating someone's feelings. Gloria says attuned to other people's feelings. Jacqueline says empathy is caring for what the other person is feeling. Liz said ability to perceive how others are feeling. Carol says understanding others' feelings. I hope this is right. Davina says when you recognize an experience that's similar to your own and you connect it to the feeling you had, imagining their feelings to be similar. Otis said the ability to feel another person's feelings. Melanie said feeling what others feel, understanding and being in the feeling of others with them. I like that one. Leah says recognizing what someone else is feeling. Marilyn says understanding the feelings of others, finding connection with another person's feelings, Dana says. Being aware of the feelings of others around you and joining with them on some level. Mark, I'm sorry, I realize I'm reading fast, Mark and Laura. Being aware of others' feelings, compassion, ability to understand others' feelings. Yeah, Dr. Gottman says that the ability to relate to or understand what someone else is feeling is how they understand this notion of empathy. And based on this research-based tool called emotion coaching, Dr. Gottman found that we can help adults learn to value a child's range of emotions. The range of emotions from happiness that I'm going to Khalil's birthday party on Saturday to sadness that I can't find, I lost my favorite toy. This 5-step method for guiding children in how to respond to their feelings. When we become emotion coaches, we help improve the relationships and we teach how to respond to emotions, meaning we're valuing emotions and feelings as a skill building opportunity, guess what? Throughout our life. So it's not in this moment. This is something we take with us forever. Guess what? We all have done it. No matter where we are on that emotion continuum, what's been modeled, taught, not modeled, and not taught, we put into our emotion coaching toolbox, and it shows up in where we are now. It happened already. But if we don't have enough in our toolbox, we can add some more today. So this 5 steps. So you may be saying, why does emotion coaching matter, Shawn? Here's why. When young children have adults who use emotion coaching, they're learning about emotions in healthy ways. I have to say that again. If I have an adult who uses emotion coaching, I'm learning about emotions in healthy ways. As a result, these children who benefit from emotion coaching have tended to do better in school, make stronger friendships, which is so important, and to actually get sick less. That's right. The next point that we need to consider is this notion of effective communication about emotions affect a child's behavior. Here's why. We found that children develop a set of skills for them to self-soothe and connect to calm based on effective communication about emotions. Children are then allowed to experience the full range of emotions. And then we learn to understand how our feelings lead to actions. As a former supervisor of adults, if I've had to write 10 people up, 9 of those times, it was about their feelings leading to inappropriate actions in the workplace. I tell you, they could have had some emotion coaching, we wouldn't have had a disciplinary situation. Then this notion of emotion coaching helps children develop empathy. And here's why empathy is so important. It's not just the ability to identify and relate to others' feelings and thoughts, or the ability to show what empathy. Empathy happens different than every other feeling and emotion. Our feelings and emotions start inside us, and then they can be externalized sometimes, and we show it to other people. Empathy is the one that we have to see happening outside of us. I see Aaron taking care of the baby. I see Otis taking care of grandpa. I see Melanie taking care of the dog. I see Carol taking care of the baby. I see Marion actually taking care of the plant in the window, giving it water and sunshine. So this care of something outside myself gets modeled for me out here in the world. And then I take it in and internalize it. It's really why it's so important. Because we can't put it all on children. It becomes whose responsibility? There's 74 people on this call. This helps the future of our successful relationships, our relationships at home, at school, and at work. I'm telling you, empathy, empathy, empathy. Dana says, back to your previous slide, Elena Aguilar in her book, Coaching for Equity, speaks about how suppressing emotions is perpetuating systems of oppression. Yes, it does. Whew. That's a whole nother 3-day training, Dana. So as you prepare to emotion coach, I want you to think about some things. Think about being a role model. I need you to think about how you handle your own emotions. This is big for me. This is big for me. I'm a person who sometimes likes to curse, but because there were lots of young children around me, I had to rethink what kind of role model I was being. At first I was thinking, you know what? My God kids curse every now and then and say, damn, it's no big problem. They're with me, it's all right. Then I had to really step back and say, is this really what I want them to learn? That if I'm frustrated, then they hear me using the word damn and then they start to use it. I had to rethink that in full transparency. This notion of how do we have empathy for children? If a child's feeling sad, or if a child has broken their favorite toy, instead of saying, I'm going to throw it in the trash, you're not getting anything else. We often have to learn ourselves how to engage with what? The child being frustrated and wanting to break the toy. So the language I've learned to use is, I understand why you're sad about breaking your new toy. When I broke my glasses, I was sad and wasn't sure how I would be able to read the book that I wanted to read until I got some new glasses. I know you're upset because you want to play with your toy outside and it was the one you brought. It's just one example. There are many examples of how we can display an empathetic sense towards a child or children. Here's a big one. Take the child's emotion seriously. Don't ask them to change it. Don't ask for clarification or are they sure? Are you sure you're upset? Just take my emotion seriously when I tell you, as a 4-year-old, as a 7-year-old, as an 8-year-old, or as a 2-year-old, take my emotion seriously. Then this next part about perspective taking. When you take it seriously, if you're really taking it seriously, you're going to convey that you understand my perspective, even as what? A 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 5-year-old. This is the learning lift for most of us, being able to really convey that level of respect and that level of humanity to young children. Yeah. To me, emotion coaching is it's not it's one of the answers to our suspension and expulsion epidemic. It is one of the answers. that if we learn how to humanize children, particularly ones that look like me, and empathize with them, right? Our responses is going to change. Our perspective is going to change. So this slide, before we get into the 5 steps, I just offer this slide because oftentimes when I come to do stuff for First 5, I show up with the early childhood, the blue column in mind. And then there are people who are always here who are like, I work with school agers, I work with adolescents. These questions always come up and I think they're funny. Not because people shouldn't get their questions answered, but because our focus and lens is on their early childhood years. But I just put some things here based on child and adolescent development around ways that we can lean in when we're emotion coaching and connecting with children and what their needs are at their developmental age. And know that, you know, developmental progression says I may be chronologically in the blue column based on my age, but I may show up and have some of the needs of a school ager, right? I may be in the school age column in the green, but developmentally, I may have some pieces that are still in the blue. So this isn't fixed. This is just a broad understanding, knowing that many children won't fit perfectly into that column if we consider developmental progression and how individually children, based on ability, you know, based on individualization, differentiation, based on inclusion, or if they have an identified or non-identified disability, all of this helps us to respond to them more effectively as an emotion coach. So let's jump into step 1 for emotion coaching. Step 1 in emotion coaching. Awareness of our own emotions. We've got to find ways to remain conscious of our emotions. I demonstrated one. When I start doing this with lotion, I'm actually finding ways to remain conscious of what's happening for me. And when I do that, guess what doesn't happen? Because when I get really frustrated, my shoulders and my neck get real tight. When I start rubbing my hands, my shoulders and my neck don't get tight. I stay connected to what's happening in the emotion, and I allow myself to experience it while I'm keeping myself connected to calm. So the question for reflection for you is that awareness of emotions. What are some things that you do to recognize a change in your emotion? What are some things that you do when you recognize a change in your emotion? Step number 1, part 2, there's 4 bullets there. This notion of do as I say, not as I do, does not work. We got to pay attention to how our bodies communicate to children and adults around us. We've got to know that behavior could be a manifestation of something greater, or the lack of emotional vocabulary to communicate what it is I want to say to the world, or specifically to you. Step 2, connect with the child or children. This comes back to respecting them. If you respect me as a 3-year-old and as a 5-year-old or as a 7-year-old or as a 40-year-old, it's going to be easy to connect to me. It will be. And once you connect, then we can talk about this notion of feelings and what happened. But we're always looking to connect, and we connect through what? Noticing. We connect not through asking questions, but through constantly rebuilding rapport with children. You've got to rebuild rapport with your own children. You've got to rebuild rapport with the children in your classrooms. And we do that by noticing what they're doing, not by asking an open-ended question, but simply naming and noticing is rapport building and reconnecting. Step 3 tells us we've got to listen to children. We've got to tune in richly. I call this active listening. Active listening could look like this. It could look like me leaning in, using appropriate eye contact if based on the context and the culture, using open body language, and my facial expressions that are matched to what the child or the children are talking about. Those are all ways we listen to children, right? We use the child to understand more about the emotion. I'll say this again. I've had to learn this and it's rich. We use the child to understand more about their emotion. If I'm connected to you and I'm aware of my emotion, that's the pathway for me to use you to learn more about your emotion. If I'm not aware of my emotions and you're demonstrating one that I find triggering or I dislike, I'm not going to ever listen to you because I'm not going to connect. There's a clear path here for us as adults. This is why this is researched. And then this fourth step is naming emotions. This is about describing in detail. Basic emotions are the starting point. Remember, in the middle, but then we need to get past that. One thing I oftentimes tell adults to do, or parents, when you're watching a show with your child or children, ask questions about feelings and emotions. And if that isn't what you do, there are a slew of picture books for young children about feelings and emotions. My strategy is don't read the words on the page. Talk about the pictures and what you think people are feeling. There's so much to do there. There's so much to do there. The second part of step 4 is regarding this narrating of feelings and when it's appropriate. Because everything that I feel as an adult, I shouldn't share with children, right? So I used the example earlier around driving in the car and someone cuts me off. It would not be appropriate for me to display an inappropriate emotion or using the curse word. It would be appropriate for me to say what worked. If we're catching the train or the bark, we're noticing emotions and how we're feeling, and I'm naming it and talking about it. We can do this walking down the street, waiting in line, or preparing a meal. So we're doing what we call everyday interactions. We're not having to set aside and add more time to our already, as I think Aaron said, busy schedule. We're doing it when we're with children. It becomes a part of the experience. And what you find is you start with 1 or 2 minutes, and then you increase the time because the children want more, you want more. And then what you engage in is what we call this bi-directional back and forth engagement that starts with emotions. We end up going deeper by using everyday interactions to discuss and name emotions. The fifth step in emotion coaching is finding solutions. Remember, the behavior, not the child or emotion, is the problem. I'll say it again. The behavior, not the child or emotion, is the problem. So here are the steps that we use to problem solving. Children typically, if they can, they tell you what happened. If they can't, they may need you to narrate for them. Then we get to that limbic system. What feeling or emotion? They may need you to name it for them, or they may use a word that is not on the list of feelings and emotions. Here's the word that young children often use. They might say, Bobby took the red pail from me in the sandbox. I'm upset, Melanie. Now we know that upset really isn't a feeling or emotion word, but to a 4-year-old, it is. So we don't want to push them to emote the way we would want an adult to say, I'm frustrated, I'm angry. When that child says, I'm upset, we know enough to know, let them continue to tell their story, use it as a learning to come back at another time. We might use that same story and insert that feeling or emotion word. But when they're telling their story, we don't want to correct them. Let them tell their story, knowing enough to know, someone says, Bobby took the red pail from me. What would we like to do different? I might say, I want Bobby to give me the pail back. All right, and I might need to do solving, not telling them what to do, but letting them engage in it. We're mapping the brain the way I talked about with Otis again. Then we want them to try it out. Whatever they agree on, that compromise and win-win. That's what we're always looking for, compromise and win-win with young children. The fifth one, which I think is the most important, the adult follows through with support. I'll say it again, teachers on the call. I'll say it again, parents on the call. The adult follows through. The part about that follow through with support is based on who that child or those children are. You know how and when to scaffold. And what we mean by scaffold is a developmentally appropriate scaffold is really two things. It's challenging yet achievable. I'll say that again. A developmentally appropriate scaffold is challenging yet achievable. If it's challenging yet unachievable, it's not developmentally appropriate. If it's not challenging yet achievable, it's not developmentally appropriate. The sweet spot to make it a scaffold, it has to be challenging yet achievable, not too difficult for me to achieve on my own. And you follow through as the adult with those scaffolds. If we do this repeatedly, we begin to rewire our brain and our responses as an emotion coach. So again, we come to the end of this session with this resounding core message that every adult has the capacity to be an emotion coach. So if we're sending the message that you are enough to parents and caregivers when they look in that mirror, emotion coaching, we may all take a different path, a different, level to get there, but we all have what it takes to resource, to use those steps of emotion coaching. And for many parents and many families and many teachers, if you're a coach, a director, supervisor, facilitator, they need us to embody it and model it as a strategy for them to add to their toolbox. Then we end this session by my friendly reminder, because we're still in the pandemic. Families are at home working, not working from home. And I think it was Aaron who mentioned something about I'm working from home and it's stressful because we want home to mirror the work, and it can't. They should not look alike and they should not feel alike. And we've got to slow down our expectations of families that are at home working and living with their children. And I just offer up Lillian Katz. Like 27 years ago, she defined 7 distinctions between a parent and a teacher. And I just loved how she unpacked those distinctions and how we need to honor those things and not want school and home to look, sound, and act just alike. I see your questions. I'm going to get to them. So thank you all for your time and attention. Of course, connect with me. While we're leaving, I would love for folk to, this one takeaway in the chat box, and don't forget the evaluation. I'm gonna come back to this slide, and with the 5 minutes, I'm gonna try to answer some of these questions that I see in the chat box, Leah. Let me see. So Leora says, can you give an example of how to do this with a younger child, a 1 or 2 year old? Definitely. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use more language. We're walking through the park. We're at Lake Merritt, and we're walking in and we see someone sitting on the bench, and the kid, that Tyler might point, and I say, oh yeah, I see the man and the lady, they're hugging and she's crying. She's sad. The tears tell me she's sad. She looks sad. I don't know what they're sad about, but they look like they're sad and he's hugging her. Sometimes we feel better when we hug. That's exactly what I'm going to do. Actually, I've done this before multiple times with the 1 or 2 year old. I'm naming the experience that they've noticed. They've told me they've noticed it, and I'm giving it language. I'm bringing it to the awareness in the developmentally appropriate way. Bobby says, how do you talk to a child when he says he wants to build a nook so he can blow up the world? Well, there are 2 responses to this, Bobby. I honor this, that those types of questions sometimes make teachers or caregivers nervous. I've had this happen. But then someone like me who's going to lean in, I firmly believe that one need not be a therapist to be therapeutic. And I think this child is asking for a therapeutic milieu wherever they are. Now, I'm not saying you become that play therapist. That's not what we're asking. But if the child says to you in the context that they want to build I'm not sure what Nook, N-U-C-K, so they can blow up the world, but I'm following the blow up the world part.
It's nuke, like a nuclear.
Oh, a nuke. Okay. All right. Nuke. I want to build a nuke so that I can blow up the world. I'm probably going to say, well, ooh, what happens if you blow up the world? I have no idea how to build a nuke. What are you going to do if you blow up the world? Where are the people going to go? How do you think the people are going to feel? So if you blew up the world, what happens to the people? I'm going to ask some curious therapeutic questions. I am. You may not have to do that. I'm going to do that to get into their world, to then gauge where I'm going to go with my questions. But I'm following them wherever they take me. That's what I'm comfortable doing, following them no matter how charged it may seem. If it's too charged for you, it's probably best for you to hear it and to say, whoa, that sounds serious, and not lead in anymore. Because if you lead in anymore and then they pick up on your anxiety and your nervousness, it's going to crash and burn. Because then they're going to say, oh, she's nervous. Look, she's sweating. Because kids can pick up on that tone that we send into the world, and you're not going to be able to hold it as a container, which is asking some open-ended questions. So again, that awareness of what is the child saying, I want to build a nuke and blow up the world? What surfaces in you before I even move forward with it? Thank you for that. Melanie said I would start with just asking more questions. I gave you some of the ones that I would ask Bobby.
Okay, thank you, Shawn. I appreciate that.
And that's one of those things, Bobby, that requires practice. Like the more you respond to children that way, you're building that brain power to lean in, to be that therapeutic milieu that we all can be if we step into it. Many of us, though, are fearful, and that's okay. If we honor the fact that we're fearful, I think that's okay. And Helica says, different feelings are not okay. Now the behavior is okay. This can really help me out with my kids. Awesome. Cheryl says, is there a certificate for the training? Leah's going to handle that part, Cheryl. Oh, they're answering that. Thank you all for the one takeaway from the day and how you plan to integrate it. Thank you for the valuable training. Great workshop, those examples. One takeaway for me today is that I vocalize and identify my feelings. Carol says, I review on YouTube. Yeah, I review them too on YouTube, Carol. So Leah put the link to the materials, and I believe, Cheryl, that the link to the materials has the link to the evaluation in there. I believe so, Cheryl. So don't quote me on that if it's not there, but I believe Leah puts it there. So if you click on that link where the materials are, I believe the certificate is there also. I'm correct, Leah?
Thank you, Shawn. Actually, I'll email the link to the evaluation just a little later today. And then you can click on that link that I emailed to you. And once you finish the evaluation, there'll be a page where you can download your certificate.
Okay.
See, thank you, Leah. See, Cheryl, it changed. Things are always being upgraded, but that's okay. I knew Leah had the right answer. I like that though. You do the evaluation and then you get the certificate. I think that's only fair.
Yep, that's the carrot.
All right, thank you all for the feedback in the chat. It's that 2 o'clock hour. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Don't forget when you get the evaluation link to evaluate it, because they won't pay me if you don't complete the evaluation. They won't pay me, y'all, and I need to pay my rent. And gas is high. So when you get that link, please, please, please complete the evaluation. I appreciate you all for coming today. Hopefully some of you come to the autism one, which is I'm excited about, and the family engagement one that I'm excited about. Also that we can share and learn and grow together there for both of those. And the family engagement one, it's actually coming from this book. So my colleague, Julie Nicholson, and my good friend, Julie Kurtz, invited me as a co-author on their family engagement, trauma responsive family engagement and early childhood practices for equity and resilience. So I'm really coming from this book for that training in May. So come out and hear what's inside that book. In True Autism Awareness Month, we're going to be doing some strategies for autism awareness that you can all use to take back to your work and time with children. So we look forward to you all being there also. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Don't forget to fill out the evaluation.
Great. Thanks everyone so much. I want to thank Shawn again for such a great presentation. We really appreciate you. And just to, as always, remember to fill out your evaluation when you get the link. And this video will be pasted up into our YouTube channel soon, and I'll send you the link to that and other resources. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us. I hope you have a really great day.